Welcome back. We're discussing how the financial crisis on Wall Street is hurting Main Street, that's to say, average Americans. From New York, I'm joined by Robert Engle, winner of the 2003 Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences. His new book, Anticipating Correlations, will be published in the first quarter of 2009. And here with me in the studio is Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeever, Director of the Research, Public Policy and Information Center for African American Women, a think tank that's based here in Washington, D.C. And perhaps, Dr. Jones-DeWeever, I could get to you with that question we had just before the break. It was a young man saying, what happens to young professionals? Do we expect a good living, a good salary, and a secure future?
That is a great question. That's the million-dollar question, I would say. I can't really answer that confidently. I know that young people have put a lot of time and effort into getting their degrees. A lot of them have gone into a great deal of debt in order to be able to have a college education, and it's really disturbing right now that in the first 9 months of this year we've already lost 766,000 jobs, and so it's very disturbing to see that their future might in fact be imperiled.
Professor Robert Engle, we had an email that just came in while we were on the show from Dubai, and it actually came in just as we were doing the show, and it says, is there a financial crisis in the Middle East? And of course, I guess that's put into perspective with the huge sovereign wealth funds that are looking for opportunities out there.
I guess I don't have first-hand information about that, but given the sorts of investments that the sovereign wealth funds have made, I can't imagine that they haven't had a big collapse in their asset values over the last few weeks. But really, many people think that that the best thing to do in the face of this kind of volatility is if you're planning for the long horizon, that there's not really anything to do but to weather it out. And I think that is probably what many of these funds will do.
We've got a call on the line from New Zealand. Andrea, thank you very much for your patience. What would you like to ask?
Oh, and thank you for the opportunity.
Pleasure.
It is indeed a small world when we can go all the way over to New Zealand, because what is happening in America not only affects America, it is affecting us back home here. I've got two questions. First of all, with all the foreclosures that are happening on the mortgages, why isn't the banks letting the people stay in them, letting them pay something? And the second one is, where are all these people going when they leave their homes? We don't hear about that.
Let me ask Dr. Jones-DeWeever here, because that's actually an important question. Why aren't the banks helping more? I mean, I presume they're trying a little bit now, aren't they?
There are incentives there to try to help people work through these mortgages, but unfortunately, not many banks are really going the extra mile to help people renegotiate and get their interest rates down so that they can stay in their homes. And it becomes a snowball effect, because if you can't stay in your home, then the value of your neighbor's house go down. Right. And as a result of that, we're seeing more people pushed out of housing. Everyone's value is going down, and ultimately we're seeing tent cities pop up all across this nation. So it's beginning to be very desperate straits for, unfortunately, families all across America.
That actually is something I never saw in Britain, which is the comparatives. When a property goes into foreclosure, the owners can't pay and the bank has to take it. The prices of everything else gets a knock-on effect.
Exactly.
So where are these people going? Andrea's excellent second part.
Well, you know, they can be going with other family members. They can sort of be invisible in that way. But as I mentioned, there have been some recent reports about tent cities popping up in specific areas that have particularly high spikes in terms of the foreclosure crisis. And so unless we do something to address those families with transitional homes and perhaps get them back into some more permanent housing, we might see more of that as the months go on.
Pedro in Guatemala, what would you like to ask? Oh, go ahead, please, Professor. Before we get to Pedro,
could I just add something?
Yes, sir.
Could I add something to that, which is one of the reasons why it's difficult to have this negotiation around foreclosures is because the banks that are servicing these loans no longer own them. They've been securitized, and the securitization, I think, is a very fundamental part of this analysis. And it's really what the bailout plan is designed to do. It's going to buy these foreclosed loans. And I think that the Congress was very anxious that part of this deal would include some help for the homeowners that were being foreclosed on once the government owned these loans. And I think that will probably happen, although maybe not soon enough for everybody.
Okay. Pedro in Guatemala, thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
A question that is rather simple. Given that the world economy is hanging by the decision of both either Obama or McCain as to who will be president in January, why doesn't the world, public opinion, and a group of Nobel laureates demand that these men declare clearly who their economic cabinets will be. That way we can vote on their teams. Now, because as politicians, they'll be the same thing.
Right, Professor. I mean, it's a little out of your sort of field to answer this question, but Pedro from Guatemala makes an interesting point in saying that a lot is hanging on as far as the world, confidence on who takes the White House next.
It would be very interesting to know who was going to be appointed to top offices by either of these candidates, and they really have not come forward on that. You can find out who their economic advisors are, but that's only a first step on it. In fact, the way the political campaign works, it's hard to figure out exactly what the candidate would do when they were president. They are so concerned about what it is the electorate wants them to say that we have to do some guesswork in our voting.
Dr. Jones-DeWeever, I want to get on to something we talked about a little bit earlier, touched on, the fact that women are the most affected at a sort of human level with what's going on. The financial stress and strain seems to be affecting them far more with the current crisis. Explain that to me.
Exactly. I mean, women have always sort of traditionally taken on the role of being the ones that actually get the job done. They're the ones that are balancing the checkbook at the end of the month. They're the ones that are in the grocery stores buying the groceries. So the impact of the change in prices impact them greatly. There's also been some research done by the Consumer Federation for America that has shown that women especially are more likely, or were more likely, to have received high-cost loans, which was really quite counterintuitive, since on average women tend to have higher credit scores than their male counterparts, and specifically African American women were found to be most likely to have received high-cost loans. So there are some questions there with regards to discrimination in the lending process.
Now, of course, there's a large layer of society, as we mentioned, in America that can't afford the luxury lifestyles or even the middle-class lifestyle. But when it comes down to it, looking at the American lifestyle, to people outside, it's so over-consuming. Is this a reality check for Americans on what can and can't be afforded?
I think to an extent it definitely is. Right after 9/11, for example, we had a president that said go out and shop, and that certainly didn't help with that cultural tendency to overspend in the first place. I think now we need to really sort of pull back a little bit as a nation and say, there are some things that are much more important to life than being a consumer, and we need to focus a little bit more on those things.
Professor Engle, a question just came in from San Francisco from Abdul, who's on our live station chat room on the internet, and Abdul sent this in saying, if borrowing is intrinsic to the world economy, would we need a fundamental break from the current economic system to avoid a similar crisis in the future?
Well, of course, everybody would like to know how to avoid this again, and a lot of the solutions are kind of like closing the barn door after the horses have escaped. There is, I think, to understand why we are where we are today, I think it's important to recognize that a lot of the pain we're seeing today is due to excessive risk-taking by banks and everyone all the way down to homeowners. And one of the reasons why this excessive risk-taking happened was because there were financial products which were designed to shield people from risk, such as insurance, which turned out not to be valuable when you needed it, and something called a collateralized debt obligation, which turned out not to be as safe as banks thought it was going to be. And so there was a misperception of how much risk people were taking when they did all sorts of different things. And that has just come back to haunt the entire banking sector, and is really, I think, at the heart of what we've seen.
We've got a call on the line from the Canary Islands. Good to hear from there. And John, your question, please. Let's squeeze that in.
Well, it's not really a question.
Okay.
It's just a point of view.
Go ahead.
That the present crisis just goes to prove a view that I've held for many years, that politicians are absolutely useless and the wrong people to run economies. They are invariably failed in the profession they really want to be in. They didn't get a degree good enough to do what they really wanted to do. So they go into politics because it pays well. If you want to get a really stable economy, it can only be run by certified engineers and accountants. Definitely not politicians.
All right. Well, John, I'm going to put this to Dr. Jones-DeWeever. Should we expect much more from our politicians? Just a very brief answer.
Well, it's survival of the fittest. They want to be around for the next election, and unfortunately, sometimes humans do not want to hear the truth, and that is really a precursor to maybe not doing the thing that's best for everyone all the time.
Well, Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeever, thank you very much for being with us. Professor Robert Engle, a pleasure to have you with us too, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. After nearly being eliminated, polio is on the rise again and is affecting mainly Muslim children. On the next Riz Khan show, we take a look at how politics might be complicating the eradication of diseases. From me and the team, see you next time.